And that's where they're headed, to that doorway, the George IV gate, between the two towers at the top of the hill. And that's where, in the quadrangle, the king and members of the royal family will join this procession. And it will turn round down to the left, to the lower ward. The heralds have marched all this way. The distinctive eagle's feathers, the Royal Company of Archers for Scotland, the velvet caps of the watermen, those blue velvet jockey caps, the watermen who used to always accompany the sovereign, and the Queen's Gurkha orderly officers just in front, at the very bottom of your picture, the Gurkhas who, ever since Edward VII's coronation in 1901, were given a special place at court. That huge standard, the royal standard of the Grenadier Guards Regiment, carried before the hearse, presented to the Grenadier Guards by the Sovereign at the beginning of her reign, never changed or replaced. The Queen's company colour, as it's called. It dominates this procession. It's a huge flag. But there is a moment in the service to come when a very small flag is placed on the Queen's coffin by the King just before the coffin is lowered into the vault. Not that grand standard you can see there, but something called the camp colour. Very, very small flag, which was used to denote where the commanding officer of the guards could be found, put outside his tent, hoisted where he was, and it's a symbol that the Queen was our commander. recognize, no doubt very easily, the Sky Boat song, Over the Sea to Sky, being played as the procession approaches the Cambridge Gate. There are 64 pipers and drummers playing from a whole host of regiments and battalions, from the Royal Scots Dragoon Guards, the Royal Tank Regiment, 1st Battalion Scots Guards, 1st Battalion Irish Guards, the 4th Battalion, the Royal Regiment of Scotland, the Highlanders, and the 19th Regiment of the Royal Artillery, in the Army School of Bagpipe Music. Members of the Queen's household, some in uniform, some in morning suits. Just before the Queen's colour there. Sky Boat Song, the band of the Household Cavalry plays one of the 3 Beethoven funeral marches that are being played here today and heard at the commemoration at the cenotaph each year. Funeral marches 1, 2, and 3 by Beethoven. The Household Cavalry leading the way here. One of the oldest regiments in the British Army, dates back to the mid-17th century, made up of the Life Guards and the Blues and Royals, the two senior regiments of the household. And they always have the job of protecting the monarch and of taking part in the ceremonial processions in London. They provide a mounted, dismounted guard of horse guards. They're there at the state opening of Parliament. They're there at state banquets. Some of the horses, understandably, a little restless at this long, slow walk, but they keep them beautifully under control. Behind the hearse, the sovereign standard of the Household Cavalry. Just lost sight of it there. Was once used, like all standards, as a rallying point in battle, and are embroidered now with the battle honours of each regiment. It is a very splendid and very touching sight, this last procession for the Queen. After all the glamour of the processions in London, there's huge numbers of people here. This quite intimate procession bearing the coffin of the Queen back to her home at Windsor, the place where she came every weekend if she could, where she spent her childhood years, and where she came for a month each year in the summer and at Easter, a place that she called home, and where during the pandemic she and the Duke of Edinburgh spent lockdown instead of going for Christmas to Sandringham, where they celebrated their 73rd wedding anniversary. And where, of course, she sat alone in St. George's Chapel at the funeral of her husband. just a year ago. These are the final moments for the people to see the hearse, because once it goes inside through the gate, the Cambridge gate that leads up to the George IV gate into the quadrangle of Windsor Castle itself, there will be no members of the public. There will only be those who've come to the chapel to take part in the service. So this is quite literally the last glimpse of the sovereign's coffin that her subjects will see, except, of course, watching it on television. On left and right of this final part of the pathway, again, all these flowers are tiny bouquets of flowers that were brought here and have been laid out. And standing there on the right of the picture, the Queen's pony or horse, Emma. When the Duke of Edinburgh had his funeral here, the driving carriage that he used to use was brought out to the quadrangle. Here from the Mews of Windsor, the grooms who work in the Royal Mews, and this black Highland, I suspect, pony, Emma. Come to watch the coffin go past. It was only a few months ago that the Queen was seen riding in the park. And as many people have said today, her two great passions were horses and dogs. And it's a rather touching sight that Emma should be brought out to watch the procession go by. The mounted cavalry now peel away. They don't go through into the quadrangle. They're peeling off to the right there. And the Blues and Royals on foot. The lifeguards there with the procession as it goes through the George IV gate. These, the Queen's Company of the 1st Battalion of the Grenadier Guards, the closest to the hearse. King's Troop, Royal Horse Artillery, about to fire. They weren't renamed the Queen's Troop. There's the bell firing, the hammer on the left of it. They weren't renamed the Queen's Troop. Queen Elizabeth said they should be called the King's Troop in honor of her father, and the same thing is going to happen. The Queen's Company of the 1st Battalion Grenadier Guards, who are the closest escort here for Her Majesty's coffin, are going to retain the name the Queen's Company in honor of Her Majesty. Two of the Queen's corgis, like Emma the pony, Sandy and Mick. The Queen was famous, I don't know how many corgis she had, 50 or 60, I think, in her life. But they've been brought out here just to the right of the arch as the cortege comes into the quadrangle, the private part of the palace. It'll go round and be joined by the King and members of the royal family at the state entrance. The familiar figures by now in this procession. King on the left, Princess Royal, the Duke of Kent, Prince Edward on the far right, the Duke of York in the centre, not in uniform, Princess Royal and the King coming out, the Duke of Sussex behind, the Duke of Gloucester behind him. And Vice Admiral Sir Tim Lawrence on the far right. The male members of the royal family and the Princess Royal. The other female members of the royal family will travel by car down to St. George's Chapel, not march in this procession.